Well, hi everyone, Craig Dyer here from Christianity Explored Ministries, and it's a great joy to have with me today friends from the Solas ministry, Gavin Matthews and Andy Bannister and Gareth. You're going to have an opportunity to meet them and hear a little bit about their gospel ministry, and particularly speaking into the days that we're living through, and also how as a ministry they are able to serve and encourage you in the work of the gospel. So let's begin by just hearing from the guys. Let me go first of all, I think, to sunny Dundee and to Gavin. Have I got the location right? Are you by the Silvery Tay, Gavin?
Well, I'm by the Tay, but I'm 20 miles upstream in Perth.
You're in Perth. Okay, beautiful. Beautiful part of almost east central Scotland there. And tell us a little bit about what you do with Solas, Gavin.
I've got a really important role with Solas. You know, advice was once given to brides: make sure that your bridesmaid is uglier than you. Well, my job here is to make the other guys look good. And I've got the perfect kind of CV for that.
I like that.
And when I'm not doing that, I do things like connect with churches and run the website and do some writing and that kind of thing.
Oh, I might use that sometime. That sounds fantastic. Andy, you're closer to where I first thought. Am I right? You're in Dundee?
Absolutely right. I'm in Dundee, where the sun always shines, honestly.
I think I quoted there McGonagall in the Silvery Tay. And if anybody...
You did. That was Dundee's gift to Scottish and world literature.
Absolutely.
And I think the world said thank you no more.
Well, absolutely. If anybody doesn't know William Topaz McGonagall, he is worth Googling. Andy, tell us about your role with Solas.
Yeah, well, thanks, Craig. So my role at Solas, I've been with the organisation for 4 years, and I have the privilege to be the director of the organisation. And for those who don't know kind of Solas and what we do, really there's kind of two things we're focused on. We're primarily an evangelistic ministry, taking the gospel out of the four walls of the churches and partnering with churches, but helping churches put on events in places like pubs, cafes and restaurants, a place where it's very easy to invite non-Christian friends. We also do lots of events in places like universities and business settings and so on. And our approach is always to try and take a question or a challenge to the Christian faith, kind of question that our non-Christian friends might have, and then really address that honestly and head on, show how Jesus and the gospel answers that, and then open up the floor for Q&A. And just, again, be very open to whatever questions or challenges, whether they're friendly or hostile, people want to bring. And we find the Lord works tremendously through that. I think if we go where people are, we get great engagement. And then at the same time, the other part of the work we do, Craig, is we partner with churches and Christian groups up and down the country. Because, again, we like to work with others, not in place of others, and really help churches and other Christian organizations to train and equip their members and their congregations to be really effective in sharing their faith naturally and confidently and with clarity at work, at home, or at school. I think a lot of Christians are afraid of evangelism. If you suggest to many congregations, hey, let's, rather than have our Sunday morning service, let's go and do door-to-door evangelism. Yeah. Most pastors would say the congregation would get lost on the way. And so we love just helping people in natural low-key evangelism. And we do a lot of that work online as well. We were doing that before COVID-19, but obviously coronavirus and the pandemic has increased the amount of that ministry we're doing online as well as offline.
Well, we love what you do, and there's such an overlap there with CEM, because we're always saying we're trying not to be the evangelists, although we have a personal responsibility to do that. But we believe that the local church is the engine for evangelism that God has given to the world. We want to be serving there, so that's exactly in keeping. Well, let's nip across the North Channel to the newest member of the team, and Gareth Black. Great to have you with us. Gareth, where do we find you this afternoon?
Great to be with you, Craig. I'm just outside the north side of Belfast in a little town known as Ballyclare. So my wife and I have been here really since just before Christmas. We moved back to Northern Ireland after being in England for 5 years, and we moved back just at the end of last summer and then found a home here. So I'm the newbie in the Solas team. Yeah. I've been with the team now for 6 weeks. Baptism by fire, as you'll already be able to tell, having talked to Gavin and Andy. but very much enjoying it and excited about the prospects ahead, particularly for here in Northern Ireland and down south as well. There'll be two parts to my remit, essentially. The first is to just complement the wider vision of Solas that Andy's just outlined. So I'll be contributing to the short answers that we do online, the sort of events that we do across the water in terms of our Confident Christianity conferences, and just generally playing my part in the broader vision, and then focusing in more specifically to the province here. My hope and passion and I guess job description for here in the province is really just to begin to pioneer opportunities for evangelism and really build infrastructure on the island here for doing evangelism in an effective way, and also encouraging and training Christians to do it in their own spheres of influence among friends and colleagues.
Marvelous. Well, Lord bless you as you do that, brother. Well, I just thought today it was too good an opportunity not to draw from you and hear a little bit from each of you just about your reflections on the impact of what we've lived through in most of this year so far, the impact of lockdown on the culture, on national thinking, and on evangelistic engagement. Gavin, let's come to you first of all. Any thoughts, any observations you'd like to share with us in this regard?
Yeah, I think having watched this situation evolving over the last month or two, that we seem to have moved through kind of four kind of moods, I think. And the first one was kind of fear. I've never seen so many people quite as worried as in the first phase as the coronavirus. You know, as the curve went up, I knew people that were making their wills, some real stress. My wife's in the NHS, and some real stresses around what that would look like. You know, early predictions were maybe up to 250,000 deaths. There was real fear. And obviously the gospel speaks directly into that, because we serve a risen Lord who, you know, didn't stay dead, but leads us through the grave and out the other side. And Tom Holland in his Dominion book talks about the effect that it had with the early Christians. Didn't leg it from Rome in the days of the plagues, but went into those communities and served people who were dying for the simple reason they had faith in a risen Lord. And so death wasn't the end. So there's a definite gospel link to the first phase. The second phase I thought was equally interesting, because I thought there was something of an idolatry of the NHS that kind of blew up after that. A call to worship every Thursday night when everybody went out and clapped. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against the NHS. My wife works in the NHS. I think it's brilliant. But I think the NHS is really the fruit of long decades of Christian ethics coming to bear in our society. But, you know, if we organize national life around a national religion and make it the NHS, we've got real problems. You know, if you make an idol out of something that can't save, if you serve created things, not the creator, you're going to have a problem. And I think that just as, you know, King George VI called the nation to prayer in the Second World War, and it was one of those national moments, we seem to have had a national movement around the NHS, not around God. And for me, that's an issue where the gospel confronts what's going on. I think we then moved on to a blame cycle, when we're going to be increasingly blaming politicians for what went wrong. The UK stats are particularly bad. You know, the deaths per million in the UK are probably going to be the worst in the world. And what I'm sensing at the moment is people are treating their political heroes like messiahs and treating their political enemies like the devil. Again, the Christian answer cuts right across that your political opponent is made in the image of God, for whom Christ died, who is extremely valuable, who is also flawed in sin, but so is your political hero. And so we need to be actively living out the ethics of Christ and to loving our neighbors and modeling something very different than the blame cycle, which is going on at the moment. But then I think we're going to move into a demand for change. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement is mapping onto that, actually, because many people are saying we can't go back to how we were. You know, we'll come out of lockdown and into the world, and we don't want things just to be as bad as they were in many ways. We want change. And I think that as Christians, we want to say, yes, we want change. And the kind of change we want is to have Christ at the center again, have the gospel at the center again, not just the fruits of Christian faith, like community and non-consumerism, but moving beyond some of those good values to the Christ himself who gives us those values. So I think what I've observed is those four phases, and I think the gospel speaks to them each in different ways.
That is fascinating. So fear, worship or idolatry, blame and change. Hope for change, and the gospel bringing such freshness and reality to these things. Very helpful, Gavin. Gareth, why don't you jump in and comment on that, or take us somewhere else just as you please?
Well, I certainly resonate with a lot of what Gavin has said. Something that I've been thinking about lately is that coronavirus in some ways has debunked the myth of stability and security that we often live with. I think even sort of moving out of sort of big ideas that emerged from the Enlightenment and things like that, that there was this growing sense that the world was increasingly moving to a progressive state. We were always making progress, that the world was predictable. We could begin to map and organize things and understand what was going on. And on that basis, therefore, we could create structures of security. And every now and again, there is something that happens on a global scale that just debunks that, whether it's world wars or 9/11 or different pandemics earlier in the 20th century. And of course, coronavirus has done that as well. And there is a tendency, I think, among those who observe these sort of things to just assume that, this is just turbulence, a moment of turbulence on what is an otherwise stable and organized flight where we know exactly where we're going. And I think coronavirus has really challenged that. And it's interesting to see where we'll go now that things are beginning to get back to normal. But for me, I think coronavirus has, to coin a phrase that Francis Schaeffer used, it's pulled the roof off. I think that myth that our lives are predictable and that we can structure them in a way that makes them ultimately secure and sort of create our own loci of hope and meaning and things like that. I don't think coronavirus necessarily has raised any new questions for what it means to be human and for the things that we intrinsically look for. As I said on one of our webinars on Sunday, I think it's just put in high definition things that we often like to socially distance from and forced us to confront it. We've always been vulnerable to biological problems. We've always had issues with the economy breaking down and our careers not being stable and those things we search for hope in. We've always needed we've always been social beings and needed relational connection and physical connection. And so in that way, coronavirus has only really exaggerated and brought to the fore things that we often just assume and sometimes even distract ourselves from with all the various sort of trinkets of distraction that we can fill our lives with. So it's raised profound questions. Whether we'll keep asking them now that things are going back to normal is another question. But I think there's definitely an opportunity among many people to continue exploring these questions as people have done in that sort of moment of immediate crisis.
That's very, very fascinating. And it's all opportunities for us to speak the gospel into. Andy, coming to you, do you have a word of encouragement to help us persevere in the work of building these engagements, of talking to our friends and of articulating the gospel?
Yeah, well, I think to draw on the sort of threads that my two colleagues have already talked about, Craig. One of my apologetic heroes is one beloved of many of us, C.S. Lewis. Yeah. And I think one of my favourite Lewis quotations, a very famous line where C.S. Lewis said, "I believe in the gospel in the same way as I believe the sun has risen, not because I see it, but because by it I see everything else." And I think what encourages me is in the times that we live in, that they're not unprecedented. They've turned up in history. They're unprecedented for us and for many of our friends, and all those issues that Gavin and Gareth talked about. But I think the gospel sheds incredible light upon that. And I think often as Christians we can be afraid of running away from the public square, running away from the big debates. We shut ourselves away in our churches. We hide from those around us. And I think coronavirus is interesting because as Gareth said, it's taken the roof off. It's exposed some of these questions in high definition. It's blown up some of our existing ways of doing church. We can't huddle in our churches right now because we're not allowed to. Now you could look on that as a challenge. You could also look on it as an incredible opportunity. I don't know about you. I've actually got to know my neighbours better during lockdown because we haven't been able to go anywhere. But we've been able to talk to our neighbours when we've been out washing our cars or mowing our lawns, whatever. I think people have craved for human contact. And so I think there are incredible opportunities. I think the number of people who've been engaging with Christian content online, the Guardian, not a newspaper known for being particularly friendly to Christians, ran with that story a few weeks ago, showing that 25% of people in the UK had taken part in some kind of religious service online, rising to 1 in 3 for young adults. And so I think there are tremendous opportunities out there. So yeah, I would encourage people listening to this, rather think about the things you can't do or the difficulties as Christians. What about praying, for what we can do and what the opportunities are? A Bible verse that we've returned to as a Solas team quite a bit over these few weeks and months as we prayed this through and ministered in this context is that those opening verses of the book of Philippians. And if you know the context there, of course, Paul writes that from prison. And there he is, chained up between two Roman soldiers. Potentially was the experience he found himself in. Now, you or I might be sitting there, sobbing in a corner, going, "Well, I had great plans. I was going to go and do a missionary trip along Spain and try an ice cream or two, and I had all my life mapped out beautifully. And then suddenly this happened." Paul doesn't. Paul just gets excited about the opportunity. Because of what has happened, because of my chains, all these opportunities. The gospel is being heard throughout the whole household of Caesar, and on he goes. And I love that book because it's a great encouragement to us who are under lockdown. Not the same kind of lockdown as Paul found himself under, but we're locked down and restricted and challenged.
Yes.
And so what about if we prayerfully ask the Lord, what are the opportunities here? What are the things that we can do that we couldn't do before? And as we come out of all this, hopefully in a few weeks to months' time, as things begin opening up a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, that idea that Gavin picked up on of change, let's pray that one through. Let's not, as Christians, just drift back into the same old and go, great, we can now go back to church, we can forget about everything we've learned and just carry on as before. What are the opportunities? What are the lessons that we can have learned during this time about doing evangelism more faithfully? The passage I want to leave you with, I love that line of Jesus where Jesus talks about Christians are called to be salt and light, and salt, for it to be effective, needs to be dispersed. If you go to your local Indian restaurant and have a lovely curry, and the chef has put all of the salt into one tiny corner of the meal, sure, it's salty, you experience the salt, but it's not a particularly good experience, and the rest of the meal is not what it should be. So it is for Christians. We huddle in our churches and small corners of society. Sure, we can be a little bit effective, but we're designed to be. The gospel is designed to be dispersed. And let's take that dispersal lesson out of coronavirus, out to the other side. And I pray that the Lord will use those listening to that as He will continue. I trust to use all that you're doing at Christianity Explored, Craig. It's an honour to partner with you guys and to encourage people to tap into the resources that you're producing. You folks are doing a tremendous work.
Well, we love to partner with everybody who loves the Lord and takes the word seriously and wants to get it out into the world. And we're so thankful for Solas. Well, guys, this has been immensely helpful and very interesting, and I hope it's just given people a flavour of who you are and what you're about. Gavin, let me finish off just by coming back to you and asking you just to help us. How can churches connect with Solas? What's the most effective way of doing that?
The best thing to do is to come across to our website, which is Solas, SOLAS, -CPC.org, and everything is on there. What you find in the immediate term is that there are loads of online evangelism resources there. So even while we're locked down, Andy and increasingly Gareth are putting out short evangelistic videos. They're all on there. You can share them online. You'll also see our webinars, which I interview Andy and Gareth with lots of ideas and tips for doing online evangelism. So that's all available in the immediate term. There's a contact button on there if you want to speak to us. Drop us an email and we'll have a proper conversation about exactly what you're doing at the moment in that particular church. And as we start to unlock, we're really keen to get back on the road. I know Andy's desperate to get out the house and get driving around the country again and meeting with Christians. We do two things there: training and equipping Christians to share the gospel and doing evangelistic meetings. So very often when a church is maybe about to launch a Christianity Explored course, they would hire a cafe or a restaurant in a high street. People would bring their non-Christian friends, and Andy or Gareth would do a talk which would basically open up the questions of life, open up the things people are talking about, and then invite them to the course on the back of that. And the two things work together really, really well, because these guys will take down some of people's faulty assumptions about life, about the things people are living for, and why maybe living for money, sex and power and these things are not working, and then say, come and find out the way that Jesus does work, and it can be a brilliant way of doing what we do as a way of bringing people into the kind of courses that you do, and the two things can work together really beautifully. So all of that and more is on the website. So solas-cpc.org, and have a look and have a chat to us. It's all on there.
Absolutely fantastic. Gavin, Andy, Gareth, thank you so much for your time today. May the Lord continue to bless your work in holding forth the word of truth. Great to know the word is not bound in these days. His word is not chained, and we thank the Lord for that. And thank you for listening and for being part of this little group this afternoon. It's always a joy to have you with us. May the Lord continue to bless you. Thank you.